Bea's research on tropical and temperate bird, bat, and arthropod communities, ecosystem services, and the management of functional biodiversity builds on cross-disciplinary approaches. As a student, she moved to Indonesia for her research and soon became internationally known for the experimental collaboration and communication approaches of her award-winning work. And her work combines perspectives from research and practice to drive innovation in sustainable agriculture and socio-ecological development. Bea is also editor of 2 international conservation journals, Biological Conservation and Perspectives in Ecology and Conservation. And she's committed to advancing the implementation of conservation science by strengthening diversity, equity, and inclusion. She shares her experience through her teaching at the University of Vienna and as a research and communication consultant for international research groups and conservation organizations. And you can get further information from beamaas.com, and you can also follow her on Twitter just by searching for Maas Bea, one word. And with that, Bea, I'm going to hand over to you, and yeah, we'll talk again at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are we recording already?
Yes, we are recording.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Martin, for the invitation and this kind introduction, and it's an honor to be invited to the seminar series. And also from my side, a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining my talk, in which I will present you the results of our recent publication and conservation letters on gender and geographic bias among top publishing ecologists, and what we can do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion among our own ranks in ecology. And now I should see the next slide. Yeah. Diversity. So diversity is the backbone of resilient ecosystems. It allows ecosystems to remain functional, productive, and reorganize also under events of stress. And as ecologists, we love to see pictures like this. A tropical rainforest, in this case from Indonesia, is extremely rich in biodiversity. Much of my research, as said, is focused on ecosystem services and functional diversity of birds, bats, and arthropods. For example, Indonesia alone has more than 1,700 bird species, a third of which, or almost a third of which, is endemic, and almost 10% are globally threatened. Biodiversity is threatened globally, and species diversity loss has reached unsafe levels across 58% of the world's terrestrial surface, as Tim Newbold and colleagues showed 2016 in Science. And yeah, the loss of diversity in the red zones here on the world map exceeds the planetary boundaries within which ecosystems and humanity are considered safe. To achieve sustainable development, we must protect this diversity, but we also this also requires diversity among our own ranks. Environmental challenges of our time, such as the global biodiversity and climate crisis, are truly international in scope, and they require diverse perspectives, expertise, and experience to be efficiently addressed and implemented. To make progress, we need diversity also in the ecological community, and therefore we asked ourselves, how diverse is the author and leadership in ecology? So in this study, we did not look for birds, but we asked, who are the top publishing authors in ecology? So the authors that publish most papers in a given journal. How did we do that? We selected 13 leading journals in the fields of ecology, evolution, and conservation science, and identified the number of top publishing authors, so the authors that published most papers in each of these journals. That was closest to 100. So why closest to 100? We extracted these data from Web of Science. For some authors, there were ties. So for example, in one of these journals, we could have 80 authors publishing the exact same number of papers, or like in ecology, 130 authors. So we chose the number of top publishing authors that was closest to 100. And then we analyzed the ratios and the trends of biases and representation of women and geographic representation among these top publishing authors in a period of 75 years. So basically in the whole period of available data from Web of Science between 1945 and 2019. With these 13 journals, you see this list here. We focus on journals that focus primarily on research, original research papers, so not on methodological papers or perspectives. And this is the list we came up with. And then we had more than 1,300 entries for these 13 journals. And we focused only on the individual top authors. So we considered each author identity only once. And there we came up with a total list of 1,051 top publishing authors in these 13 journals. And then we extracted data on gender. Here we used the full names of the authors combined with CVs, pictures from the internet, and in some cases also personal correspondence to identify their gender. We chose a binary gender approach, so we assigned the top authors to be either male or female. We are aware this is not ideal in terms of considering gender diversity in a global scale, but in this case, we wanted to simplify the approach to get the numbers out of roughly women and man representation among top publishing authors. And for a geographic representation, we took the main affiliation of each author as a proxy for geographic representation. And we consider country allocation representative for the selected top publishing authors because the affiliation for authors with multiple entries of papers was always in the same country. So that made it rather easy for us. In addition, we looked if we could find differences in representation with regard to author position, so first or middle or last author of these papers. We also looked separately at a subsample of the most highly cited papers that were investigated separately, so all papers that rank in the top 1% by citations in a given year during this time period, 1945 to 2019. And what else? Yeah, last but not least, we looked also, we used data on gross domestic product per capita to investigate effects of economic output per country on the author representation. And you see a first result here in this graph next to the journal names. So you see 100% bars for each of the journals. In brackets, you see the number of top publishing authors that we consider per journal. And in green, in these 100% bars, you see the proportion of female top authors in percent in green. So you see, for example, here that in 8 out of the 13 journals, they had less than 10% female top authors. In general, in this total list of top publishing authors, we only found 11% women, and we found that 2/4 of the top publishing authors were from only 5 countries. Here you see an infographic as a summary of our results. And what you see here is, for example, a world map, and 5 countries are marked in dark green. These are the 5 top countries representing top publishing authors. Mainly USA, UK, and Australia have the largest shares, followed by Germany and Canada. And notably, 4 of these 4 leading countries are English-speaking countries, and they're all part of rich and Western countries of the so-called global North. If we go further in this country list, we see that 9 out of 10 top publishing authors were from only 10 countries in the world. And in total, our full list of top publishing authors included only 42 countries. With 200 countries in the world, that means that more than 150 countries are not presented in this top publishing author list at all. So the remaining 32 countries had only 1 or less than 1% of the top publishing authors. So in summary, the top authorship in ecology is heavily biased. And we were interested to look a bit closer at potential reasons for this bias and changes of this bias over time. So we were interested, how does this bias change over time and what can we do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion among our own ranks in ecology. In this table here, you see, this is a summary of the main results we present in our paper. And you see that one of our approaches, so we divided these publication periods into 15-year time intervals. We also did it for larger time intervals of 35 years, but there we find basically similar results. So I show you the more refined results here. And in the first column, you see the proportion in percent of women top publishing authors. And in the second column here, you see the proportion of top publishing authors from the what we call the minority countries. So those countries that represent less than 2% of the top publishing authors. We do see an increase in both cases from 3% in the first time interval to 18% for women or 25% for minority countries over time. And on the bottom here in bold, you see the overall result for the 75-year period for the whole time period. And marked in color, you see the only time interval that showed a significant change in the proportions, what we tested with chi-square tests, so compared to the previous time interval. For the other time intervals, this was not significant, and this is also why we consider the increase of, in this case, female or gender and geographic representation as rather slow, compared to, for example, the overall population of women or people from these countries, which make up more than 80% of the world population. We also analyzed country-specific variables, so using GDP, gross domestic product data from the World Bank. So specifically, we looked at economic development as a driver of scientific productivity, and population size as a potential source of authors. Yeah, to explore the differences among their proportions of top publishing authors. So what we see here on the x-axis is GDP per capita in US dollar, and in the y-axis you see the number of top publishing authors standardized by country population size. And we found that GDP per capita and population size are positively correlated with the number of top publishing authors. And GDP remains correlated with the number of top publishing authors, even after standardizing the number of authors by population size here. So the gray area here indicates values within a 95% confidence interval above or below the observed means. So more practically, that would, for example, mean that these countries, for example, at the top right corner, such as Australia, New Zealand, UK, do a bit better than we would expect from the average mean here, while other countries are below the mean. And also interestingly, we draw this really rough orientation guideline, but it's interesting that we can see a rough divide between the so-called global north and global south, or the richer and poorer parts of the world, developed or less developed parts of the world. Yeah, well, and yeah, in addition, we looked at we compared with generalized mixed model using AIC values, if there's an impact of journal identity or journal age or the year of the first publication of top publishing authors. We did not find any effects here. So this indicates that these biases that we find must be related to other, or at least to more factors than just journal identity, for example, journal age. So in other words, we did not find that younger journals have a significantly higher amounts of top publishing authors. Also, testing these models with random slopes resulted in non-significant effects of the tested predictor variables, such as journal identity and journal age. And for the subsample of the most cited papers that we tested, we found that male top publishing authors published more papers and also in more journals, significantly more, and there were also significantly more often single authors of papers. But author position was not significant, so there was no effect of there was no bias regarding the position of, for example, first, middle, or last authors. So in summary, we find that these biases seem to be related to other or more factors. And while these economic and governmental drivers of bias are rather difficult to address by the ecological community, there are many actions that we can take and also quite straightforward solutions to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in ecology. So how to promote this crucial diversity to address global issues, environmental issues of our time? This is basically a matter of giving credit where credit is due. And why it is important to increase this diversity. It has been shown repeatedly that more diverse teams are more productive, innovative, and impactful. If we think of the higher resilience of diverse ecosystems, we can basically transfer these to scientific communities as well. For example, Jimenez and colleagues showed this in Nature and Ecology and Evolution, and also last year, early in the pandemic, we published a call to the ecological leadership or the leadership in ecology and conservation science to actively support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scientific community that was severely affected by the interruption or the loss of scientific projects. And that obviously also affected diversity in the community. Large companies and industries are not investing in diversity by chance, but because it is profitable. And it's also beneficial for us as a scientific community because we need more diverse perspective, expertise, and experience to efficiently address global issues of our time. And biased top authorship may also actually lead to biased leadership. We know that scientific careers are often promoted based on the number of high impact journals in a CV, and often promoted based on quantitative metrics. So basically how many papers an author published in high impact journals. And we also find this for scientific societies where positions are often self-nominated, pushed forward by mentors and or elected by society members that have greater visibility through to their high publication output. But through this biased community, the scientific establishment may be missing essential perspectives, as mentioned before, and this is also increasingly emphasized. For example, in Biological Conservation, in 2019, we published a special issue with 14 articles on implementation spaces in conservation science. And we also find here that we need more diverse perspectives to address this. And diversity also goes beyond gender and geographic representation. This is a part of an image about potential discrimination in a workplace, and beyond gender and geographic representation, we should also consider different levels of ability, race, sex, age, national origin, color, or religion as important to increase the diversity of our scientific community. This is also key to achieving sustainable development goals. For example, SDG 5, the gender equality goal, is considered central for the achievement of many other sustainable development goals. So in our article, we provide concrete recommendations for the scientific community that can be, or should be, in our opinion, implemented immediately into scientific best practice to overcome this bias and to overcome these limitations in our scientific work. In this infographic, you see a summary of the 10 transformative key actions that we recommend on the individual author level, the academic leadership level, up to society level, basically involving more people and larger networks here. I will not read all of the recommendations I decided, because you can do this alone, but I decided to provide you with a source, an overview beyond what you can read after in the article yourself, and summarize these recommendations into a small framework that I will show you. And in summary, what I want to emphasize here, that all these straightforward recommendations, so we focus on recommendations that can be implemented and should be implemented immediately in scientific best practice. And we also argue that they should become mandatory as many other best practices that we have in place already. Summarizing these recommendations basically comes down to the point that we should assess and evaluate different types of bias in our scientific work. And this small framework, or this stepwise approach, would always start with a self-assessment. Every one of us can start individually. For example, you could assess your recent publications or your whole publication list and look at how biased is your co-authorship. Do you identify biases regarding gender, geographic representation, or other factors that we defined in this talk? If you detect these kind of biases from a diversity perspective, it would be time to act and to develop measures to counteract this bias. For example, when we keep with the example with a publication record, a publication assessment, that would mean that you could proactively invite more women to be co-authors of your papers, or scientists from countries that are underrepresented in your authorship or in your group. Next step would be to implement these measures. So, for example, proactively invite these people. And throughout this process, you may realize some challenges and some opportunities. So opportunities could be that you already have people available in your network, or challenges could be that you realize that your network is not as international as you would like it to be. This is especially important from my perspective, also being from Central Europe, for scientists that work internationally or in the tropics, that they make sure to invest into capacity building and collaboration with scientists in the countries they are working in. So as a pre-final step, these measures should be evaluated if they actually achieve their stated goals of increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I centered transparency in this process because this is important to create trust through transparency, and also it can create a momentum of inspiration and motivation for other societies. It's important that we share our experiences regarding the promotion of diversity, equity, and inclusion to be more efficient and to save others from doing the same failures as we did, and so on. And also it may motivate the more critical parts of the society to also join the movement, so to say. I summarized some key points here, for example, regarding self-assessment. What are key steps that could be taken in this step? We already mentioned checking author ratios. So how balanced is the authorship you're working with? Same applies for, of course, for hiring ratios. Then it can also be quite revealing and interesting to take tests on your implicit bias, so the unconscious bias that you have regarding social attributes. Here I can recommend the Harvard Implicit Project. So the Harvard Implicit Association tests, you can Google it, and they offer a wide array of different tests on implicit gender, sex, geographic bias that all of us carry with us a bit, and these results can be quite revealing and can be a motivator to actively counteract the biases that we have, and that are maybe not so obvious as unbalanced author ratio and are more unconscious for us. It's also important to take trainings from professionals, and many institutes and also increasingly scientific societies offer targeted trainings to raise awareness for gender issues or inclusion issues that we as a scientific community should be aware of. And then I also want to emphasize a couple of key tasks that should be taken regardless if you're on an authorship level, a leadership level, or society level. And needless to say that societies carry a large responsibility to include, to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scientific community, as well as leaders, because they are the ones making the decisions. We also found in our paper that, for example, authors from the UK and US seem to profit from kind of self-reinforcing networks in their countries. So scientific societies like, in the UK, US, and in ecology and conservation, and these self-reinforcing networks may exclude others if no alternative measures are applied. So we should also consider alternative metrics in a career assessment and in our hiring decisions. What you see here now is in the bottom right corner is the altmetric score that also was in a positive way shocking to us, but this article that I'm presenting here had the altmetric score of a couple of weeks ago of 557. And the altmetric score is basically an attention score that gives you an idea of how much attention and potential impact an article is creating. And roughly speaking, what I found in the internet, articles with altmetric score larger than 20 already do far better than their contemporaries. So we should I take this as an example that we should use alternative metrics to assess careers, not only based on quantitative publication output, because this may not be representative for the qualifications of a scientist. Many scientists are excellent teachers, or they are very engaged in international societies, or they do not produce so many high impact factor papers, but they produce smaller papers, but which have an actual impact on the community because they are implemented or they involve NGOs and practitioners. So we should pay more attention to alternative metrics, and any attempt to implement these alternative systems, of course, should be evaluated whether it actually achieves its stated goals. Another key task would be to focus on equal opportunities. What I heard in the discussion of this publication quite often was that it's such a great development that the number of female scientists is already increasing. And this is partly true. Of course, this is a great development. But as we are looking as ecologists, not only at number of species, but we're looking at the qualitative characteristics of species, we're looking at traits, we're looking at interaction of species to really understand ecosystems. And in a similar way, we should look at scientific communities and not only look at the numbers of, for example, female scientists or scientists from underrepresented countries increasing in scientific communities, but we should also look at their individual careers and if they are receiving equal opportunities, like their more advantaged colleagues maybe, or if there are advantages and disadvantages for them. For example, comparing positions of scientists, looking if women are only receiving 50 or 60% contracts, while their male colleagues are receiving tenure track positions of full contracts with 100%. And if these people then are expected to do the same work or whatsoever, you get the idea what I mean. So also here we should look at the qualitative measures and not at quantity alone. Yeah, transparency I highlight again in this process. I explained again because transparency, in our opinion, is central to the success of implementing DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion measures, and achieve these goals. And climate surveys also can be quite revealing and interesting. So to take an anonymous survey of your community, of your scientific group, of your scientific society. For example, I'm part of the ATPC DEI community. We are currently developing a climate survey for the ATPC and hopefully presenting the preliminary results in July. I hope I don't promise too much here, but in general, these climate surveys can be very interesting and revealing when you are when leaders are not present in the room. The picture may change, and so it's quite valuable to take this anonymous feedback from your peers or your employees. And in summary, yeah, as I mentioned several times now, these new practices should be accompanied by measures and regular evaluation against their actual success. And speaking of climate surveys, before I continue, and this presentation is coming to an end, I would actually like to ask you to answer one small question yourself, because we were asking the top publishing authors that we investigated in this paper, what 2 to 3 factors held them back from publishing even more articles. And I want to ask you the same question in this poll here. So please go to, I write this into the chat, www.menti.com. And here I'm posting a code into the chat so you can enter this code. And this should hopefully give you access to this small poll here. And I'm switching to all the people that already know me know that I'm a big fan of polls. And so all the people who don't know me get to know this now. Now I have to share to the results of the poll. So we do not take too much time here, but I hope it is working for you. And so we can look if more results are coming in now. Let's see, maybe I have to refresh the page. You may wonder why we already have results here. I tweeted this poll already 2 days ago to announce this event, to allow people to participate that maybe don't have time to participate today. One more person was participating so far. And what we see here is quite interesting. So we see a word cloud, the responses to your responses to what 2 to 3 factors hold you back from publishing more articles. The larger words, typically for a word cloud, have been entered several times. So we see time and probably teaching commitment as central factors here. I hope this is working for you, because I do not see more answers coming in for now. We also see factors such as, yeah, parenting, perfectionism, yeah, okay, distractions, no working space, COVID, fear of failure, fear, language barrier is something highly important. Thank you for reminding me of that. So let's see, maybe I have to refresh the page again. Actually should be live. 19. Yeah, now we see much more. Perfect. Yeah, and we see time as one of the central factors here. Teaching, funding, lack of money. Yeah, also publishing can be quite expensive. Look at the examples from Nature, for example, the recent changes. Language barriers, not English speakers, quite similar. Yeah, few collaborations. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you so much for participating. And there are more answers coming in. That's great. Thank you. Money, but we see fairly similar results here. And this is interesting because we found similar results. I hope I'm back with the presentation now, but it looks like. We found similar results when asking the top publishing authors in ecology. So we contacted personally all the top publishing authors from the so-called minority countries and all the female top publishing authors from our list. These were more than, like roughly more than 100 of the top publishing authors. And 39 of them answered to a small survey with 6 questions. And I picked out this one question here. And they were from 19 countries, representing 45% women, and 65% of them were from the so-called Global South. And in altogether, they provided more than 309 freely chosen factors or keywords to this question. And we roughly summarized them. And the most common response, as similar to your responses, was lack of time. So a quarter of them stated that lack of time was one of the main factors that held them back from publishing even more. Also time lost, or then each with 8% under or unappreciated work and services like teaching, collaboration, writing grant proposals, slow correspondence on publications, administration, caring for family and children. And discrimination was also a factor, but only represented by 1%. Many of these factors were kind of an indirect critique in the slow review and scientific system. You see another word cloud here, and lack of time or underappreciated work and services. And these are factors that scientific leaders and societies must address immediately to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion among their own ranks. So our findings also support other findings on institutional and inclusion bias. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions, and feel free to contact me. Here are my contact details. Check my website, follow me on Twitter, or email me here. Last, I want to thank all my co-authors and the co-editors at Biological Conservation, our internal reviewers, and the University of Vienna for funding this open access publication. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Bea, for a very interesting presentation. As we kind of open the floor up for people to ask their questions in person, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I'll go through. Is there perhaps anybody with a burning question that would like to get going in person before I go to the chat? Maybe while people get their thoughts organized, Bea, the altmetric score for your paper, I was quite glad that you put that up there, because it kind of linked to the question that I had in mind already. And that very high altmetric score shows that your paper really resonates with I assume, individual ecologists. Do you have any kind of feedback from societies in terms of what they feel about the suggestions that you've put forward, and whether they are likely to take these things up moving forward?
Yeah, I know also already before this article that the societies I know, so in particular, British Ecological Society, ATPC, SCB, and many more, I shouldn't, yeah, like all the, basically the GFO, GTO, the major ecological societies are already aware of this bias, and also the editorial boards I'm working in, and they are already proactively working to increase or promote diversity, equity, inclusion by actively inviting authors, editors, and committee members from other countries. I also see this trend in my scientific communities and the groups. So in the near future, I'm going to start working also in EU projects and in the European Union. And I see increasingly that before we're putting together papers, we make sure to have a more representative board of authors, or in our editorial boards on board, yeah. So more societies are implementing distinct DEI committees in their boards that work actively on these measures. They do climate surveys, they implement several measures. Also for the ATPC, I got the first official online symposium accepted, because this is also something that we need to do. We were just discussing this, the two of us, Martin, before we started this talk. This pandemic is very challenging for all of us, but it also showed, it made many people familiar with online talks. And I think they provide a great opportunity to increase accessibility and diversity in scientific communities, to include people who maybe cannot afford large travels or conference fees. And still we have to overcome barriers such as access to technical equipment or a good internet connection. So this is still on the agenda, but still this is a good, important opportunity that we should take. Yeah, so there are many measures and development in place, and this is also fairly overdue. So just about time. We are working really long on diversity, equity, inclusion already in my work in Indonesia. And now it's finally the time where this kind of work is becoming more visible to the public, maybe also through digital communication. And we're really happy about that.
Thank you. I see we've got a hand up. Michaela Lowe, you can unmute.
Hiya. Thanks for the great presentation. Yeah, it's great to actually have like an actual article to reference to, because I think everyone kind of knew about it, but it's really nice to have like solid evidence there. So yeah, what I wanted to ask, well, so I'm actually part of the EDI at my university, at the University of Kent. And what we're seeing is that we actually within our school, so I'm in the School of Anthropology and Conservation, you have a lot of undergrads who are females. I mean, there's a much higher proportion actually to males, but what happens is that as you go further up the ladder, these, you know, women are dropping out. So I think, you know, there's not just PhD then postdoc, and then, you know, so I think that also has a lot to do with it. So yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, again, it's not just women, but it's also minorities as well. We're also seeing that at university, because also they're not, you know, their results are also not as good. So there's a lot of like questions as to, even though the, you know, when, so in the case of minorities, when they're starting university, they have like exactly the same level, but then by the time they get their degree, the results aren't the same. So I guess it's like, how can we address that issue, first of all? Yeah, my second question is actually related. You were saying that you are also doing work in Indonesia, and I'm also working in Indonesia at the moment, so it'll be really interesting to hear how you're addressing EDI there. And then lastly, how can we also, I guess it's about, yeah, so providing those opportunities in the international forums and things like that, but how can we also, I guess, increase, I don't want to say capacity, but, you know, kind of like build or support, you know, universities that are not in the global north, as you say? Is it a matter of like increasing funding in those areas as well? Yeah, just thoughts on that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I totally agree with your first point that we all knew, but it is important still to get the numbers out and have something to reference to. And there is much more work to do. Like for example, I showed all these other types of potential bias where we still do not have these numbers out and we still need to work on. You mentioned an important point that we do have a lot of indication, but still no exact knowledge why, for example, fields like ecology and conservation are typically fields where we have more female undergraduate students. And then at some point in the career, we are losing, for example, many women. And throughout the process, for example, in Western countries, richer countries, we often, there's some role model examples and better examples, but still in many institutes, we do not have a good international geographic representation. As I mentioned, we found it shocking that in our list of top publishing authors, 150 countries of the world are not presented at all, like three quarters of the countries we have in the world. So what can we do to address this? Yeah, basically, like our point of view, or my point of view in the moment, is there are a couple of challenges that are not so straightforward to address, such as economic or governmental issues of different countries, but we should be aware of them. That's important to be aware of them. And then there are a lot of factors there where we shouldn't only be aware of, but we should actually, yeah, implement them, because we have like all the universities I know of, also in other parts of the world, have scientific best practice in place. They require from scientists to work in a transparent manner, to have an eye on career promotion in their work, on distributing opportunities more equally. And this should also apply for more balanced communities in the scientific workplace. Shortly to your question, how we did it in Indonesia, basically how I would like to work everywhere in the world. But of course, Indonesia is particularly important when I, as a scientist, for example, from Central Europe, with funding from Central Europe, come to Indonesia and have these opportunities to invest into capacity building in the country with a different economic situation. And this is exactly what we did. So we found it really important to not have students, international students, but look for local students first, to look into long-term employment, and really to also create perspectives for local scientists to support the growth of independent careers, as we would do at our own institutes at home. So you carry, of course, a higher responsibility, especially when you come with this this funding gap to another country, and this is most important to do, to overcome. Also, we know there's a lot of discussion on neo-colonialism in science, and yeah, scientists from Western countries should not exploit scientific resources in other countries. That should be self-explained and should be taken super serious by the scientific community. Yeah.
Thanks, Bea. I see Barbara has her hand up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk. That was really, really nice. I second Michaela that it's good to have the reference to, you know, educate people that are still in 2021 not aware of something that is so obvious. So my question, I threw in the chat, and someone also asked something similar. So about your approach, for instance, in the choice of high impact factor journals that are English, right, written in English, if that alone wouldn't already select for this, because, for instance, I come from Brazil. We have lots of ecologists there, not everybody publish in English. So I wonder if a next step that you're thinking about is like expanding what ecology is, especially because many of us come from very diverse countries, and so much of our knowledge in ecology is not published in English. So that's my question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for raising also this excellent point. I fully agree. And currently also I'm working with colleagues, native Spanish speakers that work on similar topics. So they also work on representation in the ecological community, and they also have the ability to screen Spanish papers and these abstracts and to look for this information. This is super important. We followed a quite simple approach here, that's true. So we were looking at the leading international journals that are currently still considered important in career advancement. But we strongly want to argue and to emphasize that we do not agree with this approach. And we think that alternative approaches are highly important. Same applies for Russia, for example. We find really few Russian scientists in the list of top publishing authors, not because they are doing excellent science, of course, but they're often publishing in Russian. And I personally have a lot of hope into artificial intelligence translation tools. So I know many people, and I often use it. For example, I started to use DeepL as a translator sometimes when it's, because I'm also not a native speaker, right? So when it's late in the evening, I'm translating stuff. And I do think and hope that in a few years we can access a publication in any language and just click on our mother tongue and at least solve a part of this problem. Then maybe make these, would also be, this is why I emphasize transparency so much in the small framework of the stepwise approach that we should do, but because transparency and also from a scientific perspective, comparability of results will allow us to develop, implement, and evaluate measures to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion on a more global scale and more efficiently. So these are definitely steps that I would consider of key importance in the near future.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, and then this could also expand your diversity in your collaborators, in your research too, right? If you have others capable of translating this, especially I think key languages where ecology is done. Yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Bea. It sometimes seemed to me that, you know, there are biases almost introduced quicker than we can sort of address some of the longer term or ones that have been around over the longer term. And this links to a sort of question that's in the chat. And one of these things would be publication fees. You know, it's a nice idea. Let's make science open, and to do that, let's charge publication fees. And so there's a question here from Nadia Azmi, who asks, does the fact that top journals charge a publication fee that is often not affordable by countries in the global south have an impact on the low representation, especially since you showed that positive correlation with GDP?
I absolutely do think so. Yeah, we cannot afford the new publication fees that are asked by, for example, the Nature Publishing Group, that in a way they announced that only sending your paper into review will require you to pay more than 2,000 euro. And then when it's published, it's, when I remember correctly, 9,000 euro for all the nature journals. So in total, that would be 11,000 euro, or that like the US dollar amount is similar to that. And we already struggle sometimes with affording the much lower publication fees of 2,000 euro. And we know that our collaborators, for example, in Southeast Asia, also cannot afford these fees. So this of course is increasing a strong bias. This is a whole other topic, and that would be like we could talk a whole day about this issue, in my opinion. But yeah, what is the most important point to emphasize? Probably that this is not the right direction if we're not taking other measures as well. So we need, I'm not so sure, but we probably need an international funding to require this. But I do not agree with the system also of large publishers, where, for example, we as well-trained experts internationally are providing reviews for free. And then our collaborators in countries that are not economically not so strong cannot afford publishing in these papers in the end. This can't be the right approach. And yeah, I really can't imagine that it can be so successful for a longer time. I hope not. And I hope there are other developments. I think there are other developments in place. I hope there are alternatives. Yeah. It's what more can I say? Yeah.
Thank you. Then there's a comment from Katarzyna Nowak, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, who says, hello from the traditional territories of the Tan Quechan Council and Kwanlin Dun First Nation in Yukon, Canada. In addition to affordability of publication fees, Indigenous colleagues may be burdened with DEI activities and commitments to their own nations. This makes publishing challenging, and the alternative metrics that you describe are really important. It's also hard to convince journals to allow Indigenous languages, for example, for words and phrases not readily expressed in English, as journals may be loath to accommodate special characters. And so the question then is, if mathematical formulae can be accommodated, surely special characters can.
Yes, simply yes, absolutely yes. And here I link back maybe to my response from earlier, because also, yeah, we wanted to publish abstracts or whole papers in other languages, and we partly do. So one of my collaborators, Carolina Ocampo, she will publish a paper that is currently under review. She will translate the whole paper, but she only gets the opportunity to publish it in the appendix. So we could say at least, but I hope maybe instead of, we should invest more in this. I saw some journals that had multiple abstracts in multiple languages in place, and then they stopped providing this. And I think these publishers should invest in automated translation tools. So we shouldn't also, of course, it's important to translate an abstract into the language of the country, for example, where the research was conducted. But thinking a step further, I think it would be great if we could look at a paper simply and translate it to any language that we want it to be translated to.
Yeah.
Including special characters and correctly written names, and of course acknowledging that diversity as well, and yeah, stopping this stubbornness and the small horizon of Western countries who are simply not used to other forms of spelling. Or, for example, also my collaborator Sherazade had wrote an amazing article for a journal about in Indonesia, many people only have one name. They don't have like our system, our typical system of two names as a full name. They have one name as a full name, and then they sometimes face issues when, yeah, submitting papers or assigning to conferences. Like, just as a side note, it's worth looking at this up as well.
Yeah. Okay, we kind of wrapping up, but there's one quick question that was just, what was the software you mentioned for translation?
DeepL, like the short for deep language. It's quite nice. So forget about Google Translator. DeepL is really nice. I'm not sure. I think Google Translator has more languages for now, because also my time in Indonesia some while ago, and then sometimes when I want to write a longer email in Indonesian, I use a bit of Google Translator, and then I work with this text fundament. But for example, yeah, I find people really helpful for translations between Spanish, English, Dutch, German, and these kind of languages. I hope it will be helpful for some of the people in the audience here as well. And I want to mention, if someone had a pressing question and we couldn't address it yet, then please feel free to contact me via email and I will respond to your questions.
Thank you. Yes, Bea also posted DeepL in the chat, so if you're unsure of the spelling, you can find it there. I've also saved the chat and I'll send it to you, so you can see some of the other comments and questions maybe. So
yeah, but still people, sorry for interrupting, but then still I don't have the contact details of the people, right? So if someone wants to get the answer, then he or she, like, or these people should write directly to me. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's the best approach. If you have a burning question, please contact Bea directly, and you can communicate with her. So with that, thank you very much, Bea. It was a very interesting presentation on what I think we all agree is a really important topic. And yeah, I mean, thanks also to the audience for the questions and engagement, and the interesting discussions that we've had. I can maybe point out to you that we've had people attending from the US, from Berkeley and Tennessee. We had a participant from Niger, from the UK, as we heard, from Sri Lanka, from South Africa. So, you know, quite broad or wide attendance globally.
Nice.
So thank you very much once again for your time.
Thank you.
I would also just like to remind everybody that we do these generally on a Wednesday. So please go into the SCB Emerging Issues in Conservation webpage. Next week, Wednesday, in the same time slot, we have Tom Penkovsky from Oxford, and he will be talking about conservation cost effectiveness, a review of the evidence base. So that promises to be another interesting presentation, and I do look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.